get involved in content, investing in your personal brand, spending time on social, whatever that looks like, have a strategy for that, because it's more important than you probably think.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as a founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Collin Mitchell. And Collin, in his own words, grew up dirt poor with a single mom and 3 brothers, and didn't go to college. Nobody ever told him that was important, but instead went and got a sales job and worked his way up to the top, was promised a manager position that he didn't ever get. And so decided to go somewhere else. Along that journey, he met his wife and they started their first business in around 2010 and later sold it. And have since then started a couple additional businesses they're working on, which is a VoIP voiceover IP business, as well as a podcast agency. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Collin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. That's a wrap. That's my whole story. There's nothing to talk about.
There you go. Your whole life is condensed into 30 seconds. There's nothing more to it. So, I think there's probably a bit more to it. So why don't we go back a bit in time to growing up with your single mom and your brothers, and how your journey got started there?
Yeah, I mean, to put it frank, like my childhood was not great. My dad spent most of his time in prison. My mom, had to work hard to, as a waitress to keep food on the table. I had 3 brothers and she did the best she could. But, when you got a single mom and mom's got to work, sort of left to my own devices to do a lot of whatever I wanted to do. And sometimes, that could lead me to trouble, of course. And I just wasn't a good student. I didn't enjoy school much. Nobody was really telling me that school was important. And so I barely made it through high school by the skin of my teeth, sort of dropped out, got my credits, and then, didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And then my first job was lugging around furniture, which, as a young adult, that's fine. I'm gonna get to, get outside, get some sunshine, stay in shape. Not too bad. But I just knew that I didn't want to live the way that I lived growing up, check to check, struggling to pay the rent, coming up short, things like that. And so my stepdad, who was actually no longer with my mom, worked in a company, IT VAR company, in a sales job. And I literally had to beg and plead for an opportunity. I was not the most responsible young adult. So he was not quite ready to put his neck out there for me. Eventually I think I just wore him down enough, and he gave me my shot, and got me a job there, and I made the most out of it. So I was the first one in the office every day, last one to leave every day. Worked my tail off, came in on Saturdays to send proposals, prepare for the next week, did that for a while. Worked there about 2 years, worked my way up to the top. And I thought, okay, successful, run at sales. Next logical step is I should manage people. And they kept telling me I was ready and they're going to give me a team. And for whatever reason, they didn't. And I'm not the most patient person. So I decided to leave and take another job doing something very similar where I could then manage a team.
No, and I think I definitely makes sense. And I think that's a hard spot if you're a manager, because I mean, you never know what's going on with the boss says. Sometimes they just change their mind, or they, there's nepotism, and other times they're saying, hey, you're great in your position, but you're not a manager material. At least they don't view it. And so I think that one's hard, where you, on your side, you're saying, hey, I'm working my way up. That's my next step. And I want to keep growing and evolving. And the boss is saying, hey, maybe not yet. And so it's one of those where you're saying, well, if I can't do it here, then maybe I need to go somewhere else, which sounds like it worked out well. So you transitioned or decided to leave that position. Now, I think along the way, as you're kind of leaving that job and getting the next one, you also met your who will be your wife at the time.
So a little bit after that, and okay. And yeah, you're right. It is a tough spot because the reality of the situation is I was absolutely not ready to manage a team. But the challenge there, and this is a challenge with a lot of bosses, or specifically sales bosses, just be honest with your people. If somebody's not ready, tell them they're not ready. Don't tell people what they want to hear. to, try to appease them and keep them happy. Right. And that's kind of what was going on. So I went and got a VP of sales position, and somebody who, thought I was ready for a team as much as I was. And I made a lot of mistakes. Like, I was learning on the job how to be a sales manager, which is a bit of a recipe for disaster. But I was able to, kind of find my way and learn different ways, and, realize that, hey, not everybody's motivated the same way as me, and that's probably because they don't necessarily have the same background as me. And not everybody is money motivated, and, learning new skills and some more business acumen for the time there where I drove millions of dollars in a short period of time. And then, yes, I met my wife. We met in a running group, and we used to run marathons together, and, run up in the Santa Monica Mountains often with a big group of friends. And then she was in sales as well. She was doing recruiting at the time, but she wasn't really loving her job. And I said, why don't you come over here? We're having a lot of success. I think you'd like it. And I think just maybe she, was willing to give it a shot. And it's a little bit of a risky move for sure. Not everybody can, work with their partner or significant other. But it worked for us, worked well. And then eventually I said, I think we can, maybe go do this on our own. And that's what we did. So our first office was, we moved all of our furniture in our living room of our 1-bedroom apartment and put two big desks there. And that was our first office. And then eventually we got a real office, and we grew that first company to $5 million in 26 months.
Oh, that's awesome. And so, and I may have missed it, but what was the first business that you and your wife went into?
Yeah. So we were, doing the same thing that I had been doing. We just started our own business. And then, the companies that I worked for previously were more very product centric. So we're a bit of an IT VAR. So, value added reseller of products. So office equipment, supplies, peripherals. We mainly dealt with school districts and government. Those were the clients that we served. So essentially, we're doing the same thing, but then we started to kind of pivot into more, service based, offerings as well. Some of those failed completely. I was out of my depths and trying to get fancy, and had a lot of painful learning lessons in that first business. So yeah, we, hired salespeople. We spent $0 on marketing and grew it to 5 million in a pretty short time.
That's awesome. And definitely is great that you guys are able to, one, it is always, I think, a trade-off. You can work with the spouse, and sometimes it works great, but other times, the fights that you have at work follow you home, or the fights you have at home follow you to work. And so it is always that kind of trade-off where you can have that great synergy and work off each other and have the same goals. And then it also has that added layer of dynamic. So as you're doing that, and it sounds like it overall worked out well. And I definitely also get you mentioned, hey, we tried some things that didn't work. And I think that's a sign of a good business, and hopefully a good business, in the sense that if you're trying out new things, not everything is going to work. But if you're never trying out any new things, and you're just kind of keeping with the status quo and trying to just, keep as is and to get along, you're never going to grow, and you're never going to find the additional areas that work. And so I think that definitely makes sense. Now, I believe as we talked a bit before the podcast, you eventually sold that business off, or you and your wife sold off that business and you moved on to the next business. Is that right?
Not quite. So I actually still have that business today. But from there, I started another company, which is Unified Communications Company. So in that business, we heavily relied on our phones. That's how our salespeople made money. And we had lots of problems with them all the time. The technology wasn't super new. It just wasn't great at the time. And we had lots of challenges, and, salespeople can get a little pissy if they're, waking up at 4 a.m. to get in by 5 a.m. to call their East Coast clients by 8 a.m. And the one tool that they need to do that is not working or properly, or not working at all. So we went through like 5 different, providers in a short period of time, and really was just ripping my hair out. And there's a, tech guy in our building that was our neighbor named Luis. And he's like, I think I can kind of whip something together that'll work a little better for you. And I'm like, man, I will try anything. Like, please help me. And so he put a piece of software on a virtual server and connected it to these trunks. I didn't know what the heck he was doing, but I was like, I'll just try it. And it worked well, extremely well. And so, of course, the entrepreneurial, part in me was like, oh, I think more people have this problem that we could help solve it for. And that's when we started that other company, and scaled it to 6,000 users on the platform. And then recently just exited that company.
No, that makes sense. So now you did that, and so it sounds like, not to put words in your mouth, that you that one is almost out of a matter of convenience, right? In other words, you had a large reliance on that for the current business you're in, saying, hey, we use phones a lot, it's kind of the lifeblood of the industry, and so we've had to figure this out. Why don't we now, as we continue to figure it out, offer or expand that out and offer it as a service so we can offer to other people? Is that right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that one happened sort of by accident, right? And prior to that, I had tried to launch about 3 different service type offerings, and 2 of them failed completely. I mean, failed miserably. Like, we didn't sell any deals. We spent lots of money on marketing. We spent lots of money on specialists and consultants and hiring specific, uh, sales reps to sell that particular service, and just like blew through a lot of cash, and they'd failed miserably. And one of the services that we had launched, we hit a couple of singles and doubles, but just no home runs. And, it was, still a loss. And so at that point it was like, oh, this is what we should be doing. And so the reason we didn't just, sell that under that business was because after launching those other services, we kind of started to look like this company that, does a little bit of everything and maybe nothing well. It was like, we need to launch this as its own business, as its own brand, sort of independent than what we're doing. And it worked extremely well.
Oh, I think that makes sense. And, it's interesting kind of as you did that. That's actually one of the businesses we're getting ready to launch here in a bit, is some on website design and offering a few additional services, because we work with a lot of startups and small businesses. We've kind of been doing it under the radar and helping a few clients that have, don't have that direction. We've had to, by necessity, with some of the businesses I've done and they continue to do, had to figure that out and get those internal resources. So as we've expanded into that area and are getting ready to launch it at the end of this month, more formally, it's one of those where we had to figure it out, but it was a little bit the same issue as, hey, we're a law firm, and it doesn't, to the outside of, world, it doesn't feel like it jives. Why is a law firm doing web design, or why is a web design firm doing a law firm? And so we did end up kind of separating those out to make it a better message, or more easy to understand message, as opposed to, or making it confusing for the consumer. So I definitely get that. It makes sense. So now, as you guys have now kind of brings us a bit up to where you're at today, or close to it, but now if you're look kind of at the next 6 to 12 months, kind of where you guys see things headed, what you're going to be focusing on, you've got the different businesses and those are continuing to evolve. So with all of that, kind of where do you see the next 6 to 12 months headed for you guys, or what's in the pipeline?
Yeah. So, exited that company, and for the last 18 months, I've been really focused on podcasting, right? With Salescast, quick, what is Salescast? How did it happen? Well, I went on a podcast for the very first time ever. Clearly, if you probably remember first time you ever go on a podcast, very exciting, right? And I had a great experience. And my co-founder Chris was like, "Hey, I think I want to start a podcast. How can you help me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I can help you." And I was like, "I'm super busy. I can maybe do 1 or 2 episodes a month," which is a horrible idea. But he was willing to meet me where I was at. And he's like, "Sure, whatever's, comfortable." And then a very successful podcaster came along and he's like, "Oh no, you have it all wrong. You've got to record like 20 and release them daily." And I'm like, "What?" I mean, that's how many I plan on doing in like 6 months. You want me to record them all now and daily? He's like, "Yeah, if you want to get on the coveted new noteworthy section of Apple and pick up tons of followers." And I'm like, "All right, this dude knows what he's talking about. Let's do this." And so we recorded 20 in like 2 weeks, and we started releasing them daily. And then, after about 3 weeks, not on the new noteworthy section, 4 weeks, not on the new noteworthy section. I'm like, what the heck? But we kept with that frequency of a daily podcast, and we learned a lot in that time frame of high frequency content. And that time, it was a different show where I interviewed entrepreneurs and founders, and really the goal was just to build relationships and open doors with people I wanted to do business with. And it didn't work extremely well because it was a highly transactional product. It works really well if you have a highly relationship driven sort of sales process, right? And it's a great way to meet people and network and build relationships by providing value and collaborating, creating content. But the thing that kept happening was the same exact thing that had happened to me. As people were like, "Hey, I've really been thinking about starting a podcast. How do I do it? Can you help me?" And at first I was kind of like, "Yeah, yeah, we can help you." And then, I got back to Chris and I was like, and people want us to help us with them with this thing. What we got to figure out how to help them. And we've gone through some sort of iterations of the business, but now, in the last year alone, we launched 65 shows. We manage 45 shows today. And then we also have a podcast community for people who are interested in starting a show, growing a show, guesting on shows. And that's what we're really focused on. And it's been a lot of fun. I would say, honestly, for the first time, it's something that I actually really enjoy doing.
That's awesome. And I think that, I agree with you. I've been doing a podcast now for a while. And I think that for a lot of people just getting into them, they think, oh, I'll just, throw it up there and everybody will find it. And maybe I'll throw it up on my Facebook page. Word of mouth will spread. It'll go like wildfire and we'll have millions of listeners every
Yeah.
day. And 99.9% of us, that's not the case. And there is I think a ability that you have to be consistent, you have to grow, you have to have a plan. And I think that if you're diligent on it, it can be a great area for to build a business, but it can't be one where you just expect it to do it on your own. All you have to do is throw out the content, which is, it sounds like, where you arrived at as well. And I think that definitely resonates. Well, awesome. Well, that kind of brings us a bit up to where you're at today. And with that, it's a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask as we reach the end of the journey of the discussion. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made and what'd you learn from it?
Oof, yeah. It's kind of two-part, right? But I would say in that first business, getting away from the parts of the business that I loved most was a huge mistake, right? And I'll explain that a little bit. So I love sales. I love meeting new people. I love building relationships. I'm one of those weird people who even enjoys cold calling. So much so that I do it on a LinkedIn Live weekly. So when I stopped doing that and started working more like strategic on marketing and all of these other things that I actually was not good at and didn't enjoy, I wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, and I was actually very unhappy. And so when I got back to, like, I enjoy being on the front line of sales. I enjoy working with salespeople. I enjoy, always kind of staying close to that. That was a huge, learning lesson. And then the other thing, yeah, and then the other thing was, like, we all hear it. Failure is part of the recipe of success. So I think the part of the reason I was willing to, take so many risks and, like, try new things, even though I failed at some of them, was because, I'd worked for companies previously that were really just about, like, doing the same old thing, status quo. We're doing it this way because it's the way it's always worked. And so I sort of overcompensated a little bit because of those experiences. But you got to be willing to take risks if you want to grow, as a person, as a business, as an entrepreneur, really at anything.
No, and I like both of those you hit on, even the taking risks and figuring that. I'm always of the kind of I don't like to fit inside the box, or I don't like the norm. And it's not that, if there's a good reason that it is a norm, then I'm all for it. I'm not just trying to say, hey, let's recreate the wheel if we don't need to. But on the other hand, for me, it's always, I'd love to, hey, why, what are the areas that people are just doing that because it's always been done that way when it really doesn't make sense, or it's not the best way to do it? And is there an opportunity there? And that's what we've done with the law firm. And so what I've done with other businesses, and saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity here where we can do it differently, do it better. And then I think that it provides that value. And I also like the other one you hit on, which is, I think the areas where you're the most passionate about, you're going to drive the most value to the business, because there's a lot of things that have to be done. And if you're getting bogged down, and there's always times where you have to get things done, don't love every single activity that you're doing. But if you're spending a vast majority of your time on things that you really don't love and aren't passionate about, you're not going to drive the value into the business that you otherwise could if you're really working on those things that you can add the most value. So I love both of those. The takeaways, I think they're also mistakes that you can easily make as you get into a business, because you have a lot of things that are getting done, have to get them done. And you're saying, well, if I have to get them done, somebody has to do it, and it's going to take me longer to train someone else to do it or get them up to speed, and it has to get done now. And so you always start to get pulled into directions of things that need to get done, not necessarily the things that you're passionate about. So I think those are great takeaways. Second question I always ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Man, that's a toughie. It's hard to pick one thing. Just getting started. I mean, I'll try not to say, "Hey, you should start a podcast," even though that's what I really want to say. But get involved in content, investing in your personal brand, spending time on social, whatever that looks like. Have a strategy for that, because it's more important than you probably think.
That's definitely a great takeaway and a good piece of advice. Well, as we wrap up the podcast, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah. Great question. So I have a podcast, Sales Transformation. They can check that out. That's the best place to figure out what's new and exciting with us. Salestransformation.fm or whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Then you can search that out and find me.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, check out the podcast, and sounds like it'd definitely be a great asset to learn a lot of great information for those business owners and entrepreneurs out there. Well, as we wrap up, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners. Make sure to click subscribe. Make sure to click share. Make sure to leave a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your business, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Collin, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you.